The warship Pale Divide drifted through the cold black of deep space like a forgotten piece of metal. It was old. Its walls were scratched and dented from too many battles and too many years. The lights inside flickered sometimes, and the air always smelled like burnt metal and recycled oxygen. It was not a beautiful ship, but it was alive, and that was more than many ships could say. Deep inside the ship, past the narrow hallways and the rows of sleeping quarters, there was a wide room with no windows. The floor was cold steel. The ceiling was low. In the center of the room, there were rows of seats arranged in a half-circle, and every seat was filled with young alien cadets. They were fresh. Their skin was smooth, their eyes were bright, and their uniforms had no marks on them. They had only read about it, trained for it, and dreamed about it in the way that only the young and foolish could dream about something so terrible. They were from the Borath species, tall, gray-skinned, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond shape on their faces. Their hands had 6 fingers each, and their bones were light but strong. They were considered one of the better warrior races in the Galactic Alliance. They were proud of this, especially the young ones. At the front of the room, facing all of them, sat a single old Borath. His name was Borath. He was not tall anymore. His back was bent from age and from carrying things no one should ever have to carry. His gray skin had turned pale, almost white in some places, and deep scars ran across his face and down his neck like rivers carved into stone. His lower left eye was missing. In its place was a dark, empty socket that he never bothered to cover. He said it reminded him of things he needed to remember. Borath had been a soldier for 42 cycles. He had fought in 9 wars across 6 star systems. He had killed enemies whose names he had forgotten and buried friends whose names he never would. He was tired. But when the military command asked him to speak to the new cadets before their first deployment, he agreed. Not because he wanted to, but because he felt he had to. The cadets looked at him with excitement. Some of them whispered to each other. They wanted to hear about glory. They wanted to hear about victories and medals and the thrill of battle. Borath could see it in their eyes. He had seen that same look before, many years ago, in his own reflection. He let the silence sit for a long time. He did not speak right away. He just looked at them one by one, slowly moving his 3 remaining eyes across the rows. Some of the cadets shifted in their seats. A few of them stopped smiling. Then Borath spoke. His voice was low and rough, like gravel being dragged across metal. "You want war stories?" he said. It was not a question. A few cadets nodded eagerly. "I will give you war stories," Borath continued, "but not the kind you want. I will tell you about the humans." The room changed. It was not something you could see or hear. It was something you could feel. The air became heavier. The cadets who had been whispering went quiet. Even the ones who did not know much about humans had heard enough to know that the word carried weight. One young cadet near the front raised his hand. He was tall, even for a Borath, and his 4 eyes were wide and eager. "Sir, I heard humans are weak. Their bones break easily. They cannot survive in extreme heat or cold. Why would we be afraid of them?" Borath looked at the young cadet for a long time. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh, but it had no joy in it. "Weak," Borath repeated. "Yes, their bones break. Their skin tears. They cannot breathe underwater. They cannot see in the dark. They are slow compared to the Fenari. They are small compared to us. On paper, they are one of the weakest species in the Alliance." He paused. The cadets waited. "And yet," Borath said quietly, "I have watched a human woman with a broken leg crawl through mud and fire for 6 hours to pull a wounded soldier to safety. I have watched a human man hold a defensive line alone for an entire night with nothing but a rifle and a knife. I have seen humans do things that no sane creature in this galaxy would ever do. He leaned forward in his chair. The metal groaned under him. The first time I fought beside humans was on a planet called Borath 9. It was a mining colony on the edge of contested space. The Dravari wanted it. Our unit was mixed. 30 Korath soldiers and 12 humans. When I first saw the humans arrive at our base, I felt insulted. 12 of them. Only 12. I thought the Alliance was mocking us. Borath shook his head slowly. The leader of the human squad was a woman named Han Yuri. She was not tall, she was not loud. She walked into our command room with a calm face and quiet eyes. And she studied our defense plans, without saying a word, for almost 10 minutes. My commander at the time, a proud Korath named Velden, asked her if she had any suggestions. Borath paused again. His remaining eyes grew distant, as if he was looking at something far away that only he could see. She looked at our plans and said very simply that they were wrong. She said the enemy would not attack from the North Valley like we expected. She said they would come through the underground tunnels beneath the eastern ridge. Velden laughed at her. He said the tunnels were too narrow for a full assault. Han Yuri did not argue. She just nodded and asked permission to position her squad near the eastern ridge. Velden agreed, mostly to get rid of her. Borath looked at the cadets. His voice dropped even lower. 3 days later, the Dravari came through the eastern tunnels, exactly as she said they would. If Han Yuri and her squad had not been there, they would have hit our flank and killed us in our sleep. Instead, the humans held the tunnel entrance for 4 hours until we could reposition. 4 hours. 12 humans against 200 Dravari. The room was completely silent. No one moved. That was the first night, Borath said, and it was only the beginning. I am going to tell you what happened over the next 11 days on Borath 9. I am going to tell you about the things I saw humans do, and when I am finished, you will understand something that no training manual and no simulation can ever teach you. He pointed one long, scarred finger at the cadets. Humans are not strong. They are not fast. They are not built for war the way we are. But they carry something inside them that I have never seen in any other species in this galaxy. I do not have a word for it in our language. The humans call it many things: willpower, stubbornness, spirit. But none of those words are big enough. Borath sat back in his chair and closed his 3 eyes for a moment. Listen carefully, he said, and remember the name Han Yuri. Because if you ever meet a human like her on the battlefield, your life will never be the same. The cadets sat in silence, and Borath began to tell his story. Borath kept his 3 eyes closed for a few seconds longer. The cadets waited. The hum of the ship was the only sound in the room. Then he opened his eyes and began again. The siege of Borath 9 was not supposed to last long. The Alliance command had told them it would be a simple defense mission. Hold the mining colony for 5 days. Reinforcements would arrive. Simple, clean, easy. But war, Borath had learned, was never any of those things. After the first tunnel attack, the Dravari pulled back to regroup. Commander Velden was shaken, but still proud. He refused to admit that the human sergeant had been right. He adjusted the defense lines and placed more soldiers near the eastern ridge, but he kept the main force facing north. He still believed the real attack would come from the valley. Han Yuri said nothing about this. She did not argue. She did not complain. She simply moved her squad to wherever she believed they were needed most, and prepared them quietly. Borath watched her during those early days with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. She was not like any commander he had ever known. She did not raise her voice. She did not give long speeches. She spoke to her soldiers in short, calm sentences, and they listened to her, as if every word she said was the most important thing they had ever heard. Her squad was small but tight. There was her second-in-command, a broad-shouldered man named Ko Teho. Teho was the squad medic, though he looked more like a fighter than a healer. His hands were large and rough, but Borath would later learn that those same hands could stitch a wound closed with perfect precision, even while explosions shook the ground around him. Teho smiled often. This was something Borath could never understand. The man smiled while patching torn flesh. He smiled while checking weapons. He smiled while eating the terrible ration packs that tasted like wet dust. Once, Borath asked him why he smiled so much. Teho looked at him and said, "Because if I stop smiling, I will start thinking. And if I start thinking, I will be afraid. And I do not have time to be afraid right now." Borath told the cadets that he remembered those words perfectly. He had turned them over in his mind 1,000 times since that day. On the 4th day of the siege, the Dravari attacked again. This time they came from everywhere. North, east, south, hundreds of them. The valley, the tunnels, the open ground west of the colony. It was not a simple assault. It was a full siege. They surrounded the colony and cut off all communication with the Alliance fleet. The reinforcements that were supposed to arrive on day 5 never came. No one was coming. Commander Veldon panicked. He did not show it on his face because Korath commanders were trained to hide fear. But Borath could see it in the way his hands shook and in the way his orders became confused and contradictory. Move north. No, move east. Hold the line. No, fall back. The Korath soldiers obeyed, but their movements became messy and slow. Confusion spread through the ranks like a disease. On the 6th day, the colony's main power generator was destroyed by an enemy missile. The lights went out. The heating systems failed. The temperature on Borath 9 was already cold, but without heat, it became deadly. The Korath soldiers could survive it for a while. Their bodies could handle extreme cold better than most species. But the humans should have suffered. Their bodies were not made for this kind of cold. Borath expected to find the humans huddled together, shivering and useless. Instead, he found them working. Han Yuri had ordered her squad to strip parts from broken vehicles and build small heat generators from scrap metal. They used fuel cells from damaged weapons to power them. It was rough and ugly, but it worked. Within 3 hours, the humans had created enough heat sources to keep the most critical areas of the base warm. They shared them with the Korath soldiers without being asked. Borath remembered standing in front of one of those small, glowing machines, feeling the warmth on his scarred face, and thinking that he had been wrong about humans. Completely, terribly wrong. By the 8th day, things were bad. The food was almost gone. Water was being rationed to a few sips per day. Ammunition was running low. Several Korath soldiers had been killed, and many more were wounded. The medical bay was full. The colony's only doctor, a Korath physician, was overwhelmed and exhausted. That was when Teho stepped in. He walked into the medical bay with a calm expression and offered his help. The Korath doctor looked at him with suspicion. Human medicine and Korath medicine were different. Their bodies were different. Borath later found out that Teho had spent 2 full years learning the anatomy and medical needs of every allied species before his deployment. He knew where every major organ in a Korath body was. He knew which medicines were safe and which were toxic. He knew how to set a Korath bone and how to stop Korath bleeding. The Korath doctor accepted his help. For the next 3 days, Teho worked almost without sleep. He stitched wounds with whatever he could find. When the medical thread ran out, he used thin wire from the communication equipment. When the painkillers ran out, he talked to the wounded soldiers to keep them calm. He told them stories. He told them jokes. He told them about a city on Earth called Busan, where the ocean was blue and the seafood was fresh, and the sunsets turned the sky pink and gold. Wounded Borath soldiers, who had never seen Earth and never would, lay on their cots and listened to this human man describe his home with such warmth and love that for a few moments they forgot they were dying. Borath paused his story. He looked down at his own hands. They were old and tired now, but he could still feel the cold of Borath 9 in his bones. He could still smell the blood and the smoke. He could still hear Teho's voice, steady and kind, rising above the sounds of war. On the 9th day, Borath continued, Commander Veldin was killed. A Dravari sniper shot him through the command center window. He died immediately. There was no time to mourn. The Borath soldiers looked to the next highest-ranking officer, a lieutenant named Sorath, but Sorath was frozen. He stood in the command room, staring at Veldin's body, and he could not speak. He could not move. The weight of command had fallen on him, and it had crushed him before he even took a single step. Borath looked at the cadets. Several of them had their mouths slightly open. None of them were smiling anymore. Han Yuri walked into the command room. She looked at Veldin's body. She looked at Sorath. Then she looked at me. And she said very calmly, I need your soldiers to trust me for the next 48 hours. Can you make that happen? I did not outrank her. She did not outrank me. We were from different species, different chains of command. But I looked into her eyes, and I saw something there that I had not seen in any Borath officer's eyes in a long time. I saw certainty. Not arrogance, not pride, just a deep, quiet certainty that she knew what needed to be done. Borath's voice grew even quieter. I said yes. I gathered our remaining soldiers, and I told them that we would follow the human sergeant's orders. Some of them were angry. Some of them were ashamed. A Borath warrior taking orders from a human, it felt wrong to them. But they were tired and scared and out of options. So they agreed. He took a slow, deep breath. The scars on his neck stretched as his chest expanded. And that decision, Borath said, saved every single one of our lives. He let the words settle in the room like dust after an explosion. The cadets did not move. They did not whisper. They just sat and listened, because they were beginning to understand that this was not a glory story. This was something else entirely. What she did next, Borath said, is something I will carry with me until the day I die. And he continued. Han Yuri's plan was not complicated. That was what made it terrifying. She gathered every remaining soldier in the colony's underground storage room. Borath and human, all of them packed together in the dim light of emergency lamps. The room smelled of sweat and rust and fear. Borath stood beside her, his arms folded across his chest, watching his soldiers watch this small human woman who had somehow become their only hope. Yuri spoke in a clear, flat voice. She did not try to inspire them. She did not tell them they would win. She simply told them the truth. The enemy had them surrounded. No reinforcements were coming. Their supplies would last 2 more days at most. If they stayed where they were, they would die slowly. So they would not stay. She pointed at a crude map she had drawn on the wall with charcoal. The Dravari had set up their command position on a hill, about 3 kilometers east of the colony. It was well defended. But Yuri had been watching their patrol patterns for days. She had noticed something. Every night, between the 3rd and 4th hour after sunset, the Eastern Patrol shifted positions. For exactly 12 minutes, there was a gap in their line, a narrow corridor of open ground, barely 200 meters wide, that led straight toward the hill. We go through the gap, Yuri said, fast and quiet. We hit their command position, destroy their communication equipment, and kill their field commander. Without orders, the Dravari ground troops will scatter. They are not like us. They do not think for themselves. They follow commands. Take away the one giving commands, and the siege breaks. One of the Borath soldiers spoke up. His name was Gevran, and he was older than most of the others. He had a wound on his side that Teho had stitched closed 2 days ago. "And what happens if they see us before we reach the hill?" he asked. "Then we fight." "Against how many?" "It does not matter how many," Yuri said. "We either do this, or we die here. Those are the only two choices." Gevran stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. That was enough. Yuri divided them into 3 groups. The first group, led by herself, would move through the gap and assault the hill directly. The second group, led by Borath, would create a distraction on the northern side to draw enemy attention. The third group, just 4 soldiers, would stay behind to guard the wounded who could not move. Then Yuri called forward a young human soldier. His name was Bei Jinu. He was the youngest member of her squad. 23 years old in human time. Thin, quiet, with dark eyes that always seemed to be looking at something no one else could see. He rarely spoke. When he did, his voice was so soft that people had to lean in to hear him. Yuri gave Jinu a special task. He would go ahead of the main group, alone, and move through the gap first. He would carry a short-range radio and a blade, nothing else. His job was to reach the base of the hill before everyone else, find a position close to the enemy's communication array, and wait. If the main assault succeeded, he would destroy the array. If the main assault failed, he would call in an orbital strike on his own position. Borath told the cadets he did not understand this order at first. An orbital strike on his own position meant death. It meant calling fire from the sky down on yourself and everything around you. It was not a backup plan. It was a suicide order. But Jinu did not hesitate. He did not ask questions. He simply nodded, took the radio and the blade, and checked them both with careful hands. Then he looked at Yuri, and something passed between them. Not words, not even a look that Borath could fully read. Just a silent understanding between 2 people who knew exactly what was being asked and what it meant. They moved out at nightfall. The cold of Borath 9 hit them immediately. Without the heat generators, the outside air felt like knives against exposed skin. The Borath soldiers handled it better, but even they felt the deep chill settle into their bones. The humans wrapped their faces and hands in strips of fabric torn from supply bags. It was not enough, but they did not complain. Jinu left first. He moved into the darkness alone, and within seconds he was gone, swallowed by the night as if he had never existed. Borath watched him disappear and felt a strange heaviness in his chest. He did not know this young human. He had barely spoken to him. But something about watching a person walk alone into the dark, knowing they might never come back, left a mark that no amount of time could erase. Borath took his group north. They fired weapons at empty positions. They threw makeshift explosives that were more sound than damage. The goal was simple: make the Dravari think the colony was attempting a breakout to the north. Draw their eyes, draw their soldiers, and leave the eastern gap open for just a few minutes longer. It worked. Borath could hear the Dravari forces shifting. Their heavy footsteps moved through the dark toward his position. He pulled his group back slowly, firing and retreating, leading the enemy away from the east like a fisherman dragging a net. Meanwhile, Yuri and her group moved through the gap. Borath was not there to see it, but he heard about it later from the survivors. They moved in silence. Absolute silence. No talking, no signals, just hand signs and instinct. The gap was narrow and exposed, and the frozen ground cracked under their feet. Every step was a risk. Every second in the open was a chance to die. All of them. They reached the base of the hill and began to climb. The Dravari had set up defensive positions along the slope, but most of those soldiers had been pulled north by Borath's distraction. What remained was a skeleton crew, alert but thin. Yuri gave the signal, and they attacked. It was fast and brutal. The Borath soldiers fought with the strength and precision they were known for. The humans fought with something else, something wild and desperate and unbreakable. Borath had seen many species fight. He had seen the calculated strikes of the Fenari. He had seen the savage charges of the Broken. But he had never seen anything like the way humans fought when they were cornered and out of options. They did not fight like soldiers. They fought like something older and more dangerous. Like animals protecting their young. Like fire burning through dry wood. They reached the top of the hill. The Dravari field commander tried to call for reinforcements, but the communication array was already dead. Beijinu had gotten there first. He had crawled up the back of the hill alone in the dark, found the array, and cut every cable and wire with his blade. Quietly, carefully, like a surgeon removing a disease. When Yuri's group reached the command post, they found Jinu sitting beside the destroyed equipment, with his blade across his knees. His hands were bleeding, not from fighting, but from the cold and the sharp metal edges of the cables. He looked up at Yuri and said 2 words, "It is done." The Dravari field commander was killed in the assault. Without his orders, the enemy troops below became confused. Some tried to regroup, some retreated. Some simply stopped fighting and stood still, waiting for commands that would never come. By morning, the siege was broken. Borath's distraction group took heavy fire during the night. Borath himself was hit in the shoulder by a blast that burned through his armor and left a scar he still carried. But they held long enough. They gave Yuri the time she needed. When the sun rose over Borath 9, Borath made his way to the hill. He found the human soldiers sitting in the dirt, exhausted and bleeding and quiet. Yuri was leaning against a broken wall, her eyes half closed. Tejo was already moving among the wounded, smiling that impossible smile of his, stitching and bandaging as if he had slept 8 full hours instead of none. And Jinu sat apart from the others, alone, still holding his blade. His dark eyes stared at nothing. Borath walked over to him and stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say. Finally he asked, "Would you have done it? Called the strike on yourself?" Jinu looked up at him. His face was calm. His voice was quiet. "Yes," he said, without thinking. Borath told the cadets that this was the moment he truly understood what humans were. Not their strength, not their cleverness, not their ability to adapt, but their willingness to erase themselves completely if it meant the people beside them would live. He had never encountered this in any other species, not to this degree, not with this certainty. The siege was broken, Borath said to the silent room, but the war was not over, and the worst was still to come. He looked at his scarred hands again. "Because on the 11th day, I learned what it costs a human to be this brave." The siege was broken, but Borath 9 was not safe. The Dravari ground forces had scattered after losing their field commander, but their fleet still held orbit above the planet. 3 warships, old but powerful, circled the sky like patient predators. As long as those ships remained, no Alliance transport could land. No evacuation, no supplies, no rescue. The colony was free from the ground siege, but it was still a cage. Borath told the cadets that the day after the hill assault was the quietest day he had ever experienced in a war zone. No one fought, no one planned. Everyone just existed. The Borath soldiers slept or sat in silence, staring at walls. The humans did the same, though Tejo still moved among the wounded, checking bandages and whispering kind words to soldiers who were too tired to respond. Han Yuri spent most of that day alone. She sat on the roof of the colony's main building, looking up at the sky. Borath climbed up to check on her once, and found her holding a small piece of paper. It was worn and soft from being folded and unfolded hundreds of times. He could not read the human writing on it, but he saw the small drawing at the bottom. A child's drawing. A house with a yellow sun above it, and two stick figures holding hands. One big, one small. Yuri folded the paper and put it back in her pocket when she noticed him. She did not explain it. She did not need to. Borath understood. Somewhere on Earth, there was a child waiting for this woman to come home. And every decision Yuri made, every risk she took, every calm word she spoke while the world burned around her, she made while carrying the weight of that small drawing in her pocket. Borath did not tell the cadets what he felt in that moment. Some things were too heavy for words. On the 11th day, the situation changed. The colony's damaged long-range communication equipment was repaired by a Borath engineer, and they made contact with the Alliance fleet. The news was both good and bad. A rescue fleet was on its way, but it was still 16 hours out. The Dravari ships in orbit had received their own reinforcements. 2 more warships had arrived, making it 5 in total. The Alliance fleet would not be able to break through without a fight, and that fight would take time. Time the people on the ground might not have. But there was another problem. The Dravari, furious about losing their ground commander, had begun charging their orbital bombardment weapons. In less than 4 hours, they would be ready to fire. And when they did, they would turn the entire colony into glass and ash. Every living thing on the surface would be dead. Yuri received this information calmly. She sat in the ruined command room with Borath, Tejo, and the remaining soldiers, and she listened to the transmission without expression. When it ended, she asked a single question. Was there any way to disable or delay the bombardment from the surface? The Borath engineer said no. The ships were in high orbit, out of range of any weapon they had on the ground. The only way to stop the bombardment was to destroy or disable at least one of the Dravari ships, which would break their firing formation and force them to recalibrate. But that would require a ship, and they had no ships. Except they did. Borath told the cadets that there was one ship left at the colony. A small transport vessel called a Kirin-class shuttle. It was parked in the underground hangar. Damaged, but functional. It could fly, but just barely. Its weapons were gone. Its shields were weak. It was built for carrying cargo, not for fighting. Yuri looked at the shuttle for a long time. Then she turned to her squad and asked if anyone had flight experience with Kirin-class ships. A woman at the back of the room raised her hand. Her name was Lim Sora. She was the squad's backup pilot. She was 28 years old, quiet in a different way than Jinnu was quiet. Where Jinnu's silence felt like a deep pool of still water, Sora's silence felt like a held breath, like she was always waiting for something. She had short black hair and a thin scar above her right eyebrow from a training accident years ago. She rarely spoke about herself. The other soldiers respected her, but even they admitted that they did not fully know her. Sora stood up and walked to the front of the room. She looked at the shuttle specifications on the damaged screen. She studied the orbital positions of the Dravari ships. She asked the Borath engineer 3 questions about the shuttle's fuel capacity, its maximum speed, and the structural integrity of its hull at full thrust. The engineer answered each question. Sora nodded after each answer, her face completely still. Then she said, "I can do it." The room went cold, not from the temperature, from understanding. Sora's plan was simple and impossible. She would fly the shuttle straight up through the atmosphere at maximum speed. The shuttle had no weapons, so she could not fire on the Dravari ships. But she did not need weapons. The shuttle still had a full load of mining fuel in its cargo hold. Thousands of liters of highly explosive chemical fuel that the colony used for its deep drilling equipment. If she flew the shuttle directly into the closest Dravari warship at full speed, the explosion from the fuel would be enough to cripple or destroy it. The firing formation would break, the bombardment would be delayed, and the Alliance fleet would have time to arrive. No one spoke for a long time. Borath broke the silence. He said what everyone was thinking. You would not survive. Sora looked at him. Her expression did not change. I know, she said. Tejo stood up. His smile was gone for the first time since Borath had met him. His face was pale and tight. He started to speak, but Sora shook her head. Do not, she said softly. Please. Yuri walked to Sora and stood in front of her. The two women looked at each other. Borath could not read human expressions as well as he could read Korath ones, but even he could see the pain in Yuri's eyes. She did not want this. Every part of her did not want this. But she was a commander, and she knew there was no other option. Is there any other way? Yuri asked. Her voice was steady, but barely. No, Sora said. Yuri closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice did not shake. Then go, she said, and know that we will remember. Sora nodded. She did not make a speech. She did not say goodbye to everyone. She walked to each member of her squad, one by one, and touched them on the shoulder. Just a brief touch, a hand on a shoulder. That was all. When she reached Tejo, he grabbed her hand and held it for a few seconds. His eyes were red. She squeezed his hand once, and then let go. She walked to the hangar alone. Borath followed her. He did not know why. His legs carried him there before his mind could decide. He found her in the shuttle, already running the startup sequence. The engines hummed and shook. The old ship groaned like a tired animal being forced to run one last time. Borath stood at the open door of the shuttle. Why? He asked. He did not know what else to say. Sora looked at him from the pilot's seat. For the first time, he saw something in her eyes that was not quiet or still. It was fire. A deep, burning light that seemed to come from somewhere far inside her. Because they are my people, she said. Yours too. The door closed. The shuttle lifted off. It rose through the hangar ceiling, through the broken sky of Borath 9, and up into the black of space. Borath ran to the surface and looked up. He could see the shuttle's engine trail. A thin line of light climbing higher and higher. He could see the Dravari ships, 5 dark shapes against the stars. He watched the tiny shuttle fly toward the closest one. The Dravari fired at her. Beams of energy shot through space, trying to hit the small, fast-moving target. Sora dodged. She rolled. She pushed the old shuttle harder than it was ever meant to be pushed. The ship screamed around her, falling apart piece by piece, but she kept going. She hit the warship at full speed. The explosion was silent in space, but on the surface of Borath 9, the sky lit up. A flash of white and gold that turned the night into day for 3 full seconds. The Dravari warship broke apart. Its burning pieces scattered across orbit like falling stars. The remaining 4 ships broke formation immediately, pulling back, recalibrating, confused and afraid. The bombardment never came. 16 hours later, the Alliance fleet arrived and drove the Dravari away. Borath stopped speaking. The cadets sat in absolute silence. Some of them had tears running down their faces. Though Korath tears were different from human ones. They were thin and silver, and they evaporated quickly in dry air. But they were there. Lim Sora had no grave, Borath said quietly. There was nothing left to bury. She became light and fire, and then she became nothing. She was 28 years old. She liked to read. She kept a small plant in her quarters that she watered every morning. She never told anyone why. He looked at the cadets with his 3 old eyes. The cadets who came before you always ask the same question at this point. They ask if she was afraid. I do not know. I never got to ask her. But I will tell you what I believe. I believe she was terrified. And I believe she did it anyway. And that is the most frightening thing about humans. Not that they feel no fear, but that fear does not stop them. The room stayed silent for a long time after Borath finished telling them about Lim Sora. The kind of silence that has weight to it. The kind that presses against your chest and makes breathing feel like work. The cadets sat still in their seats, and not one of them looked eager anymore. The dreams of glory they had carried into this room were gone, burned away like fuel in a dying shuttle, climbing toward the stars. Borath let the silence stay. He had learned over many years that silence taught better than words. Words could be argued with, twisted, forgotten. But silence after a hard truth sat inside a person like a stone in deep water. It did not move. It did not fade. It stayed. Finally, one of the cadets spoke, a young female Borath sitting near the middle of the group. Her voice was thin and careful. What happened after? To the humans? To Han Yuri and the others? Borath looked at her. He nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting the question and was deciding how much he was willing to give. The Alliance fleet arrived, he said. They evacuated us from Borath 9. Medical ships took the wounded. The dead were counted and recorded. Reports were filed. That is what happens after a battle. The war does not care about your grief. It gives you forms to fill and numbers to report, and it moves on to the next fight. He shifted in his chair. The metal creaked beneath him. Han Yuri received a commendation from the Alliance Command. A medal. A piece of metal on a ribbon. She held it in her hand during the ceremony and looked at it the way a person looks at something that is both very small and very heavy at the same time. She did not wear it. I never saw it again. He paused and scratched one of the scars on his neck, an old habit. Tejo went back to the medical corps. He was assigned to a field hospital on a station near the border. I heard that he continued his work there for many years, saving lives, stitching wounds, smiling, always smiling. I saw him once years later at a supply depot. He recognized me immediately. He walked up to me and said my name, and then he hugged me. A Borath and a human, standing in a crowded depot, holding each other like old friends. Because that is what we were. The war had made us that, whether we wanted it or not. Borath's voice softened. It was strange to hear, this rough, scarred old soldier speaking gently, like a man holding something fragile. Beijenu left the military after Borath 9. He went home to Earth, to a small town near the mountains. I do not know what he did there. I was told that he became very quiet, quieter than before, if that was possible. He did not talk about the war. He did not keep in touch with the other soldiers. He simply disappeared into a normal life, like a stone dropped into a river. The water closes over it, and after a while, you cannot tell where it fell. The cadets listened without moving. And Sora, Borath said. He stopped. He said her name again, quieter this time. Sora. He let it hang in the air. There was a memorial service for her on Earth. I was not invited, because it was a private human ceremony. But Yuri sent me a message about it afterward. She said that Sora's mother attended, an old woman who had traveled a long way to stand in a room full of soldiers and listen to them say kind things about her daughter. Yuri said the mother did not cry. She stood straight and still and listened to every word, and at the end, she said only one thing. Borath looked down at the floor. She said she always took care of everyone else first, even when she was small, even when she was tired. She always made sure everyone else was okay before she thought about herself. And then the mother sat down, and the ceremony was over. Borath did not speak for a while. The cadets waited. Some of them wiped their faces. The silver tears of the Borath evaporated quickly, but new ones came to replace them. When Borath spoke again, his voice had changed. It was harder now. Not angry, but firm, like a blade being drawn from its sheath. He stood up from his chair slowly, his old body protesting with creaks and pops. He placed his scarred hands behind his back and looked at the cadets with all three of his remaining eyes. I did not tell you this story to entertain you, he said. I did not tell it to scare you. I told it because you are about to go out there. He pointed toward the ceiling, toward the endless dark beyond the ship's hull. You are about to enter a galaxy that is full of species and wars and conflicts that you cannot yet imagine. And some of you will fight alongside humans. Some of you may fight against them. And you need to understand what that means. He took a step forward. The cadets in the front row leaned back slightly without realizing it. Humans are not the strongest species. You already know this. Their bones are fragile. Their senses are limited. They live short lives. A Borath can live for 200 cycles. A human is lucky to see 80 of their years. They know this. They are born knowing that their time is short, and this knowledge does something to them. It makes them urgent. It makes them fierce. It makes them love harder and fight harder and hold on longer than any creature that has the luxury of time. His voice rose, not to a shout, but to something that filled the room completely. I have fought beside the Fenari, who calculate every move like a machine. I have fought beside the Brocken, who charge into battle with no thought for their own lives. I have fought beside a dozen species, each with their own strengths, their own way of war, but none of them are like humans. None of them. He pointed at the cadets with one long, scarred finger. The Fenari fight with logic. The Brocken fight with rage. The Borath fight with discipline and pride. But humans fight with something else. They fight with love. That is the secret. That is the thing that no training manual will ever teach you, and no simulation will ever show you. When a human fights, they are not fighting for territory, or resources, or glory. They are fighting for the person standing next to them. They are fighting for the child who drew a picture of a house with a yellow sun. They are fighting for the man who smiles while stitching wounds because he is afraid that if he stops smiling, he will break. They are fighting for the quiet boy who walked into the dark alone with a blade and a radio and said yes without thinking. Borath's voice dropped low again. They are fighting for the woman who flew a burning ship into the sky because she could not bear the thought of her friends dying below. The room was so quiet that Borath could hear the heartbeats of the cadets closest to him. Fast, unsteady, young hearts learning, for the first time, what fear really meant. He straightened himself. Despite his age, despite his scars, despite the missing eye and the bent back, and the hands that shook when he was tired, there was something in the way he stood that made every cadet in the room feel small. Not because he was trying to make them feel that way, but because they were looking at a man who had survived something they could not yet understand, and they knew it. I will leave you with one piece of advice, Borath said. One thing that I want you to carry with you into whatever battles wait for you out there. He looked at them. Each one last time. If you ever find yourself on a battlefield, and you see humans on the other side, do everything in your power to end that fight before it begins. Negotiate, surrender, retreat, do whatever you must. Because humans do not stop. They do not give up. They will crawl through fire with broken bones. They will hold a line until their hearts stop beating. They will turn their own bodies into weapons if that is what it takes. And they will do it with love in their hearts and tears in their eyes. And that is a combination that no force in this galaxy has ever been able to defeat. He stepped back. But if you find yourself on the same side as humans, if they are your allies, your partners, your friends, then thank whatever gods you believe in. Because there is no safer place in this galaxy than beside a human who has decided that you are worth protecting. Borath picked up his coat from the back of his chair. It was old and worn, like everything else about him. He put it on slowly, adjusting it over his scarred shoulders. Pray you fight alongside them, he said, never against. He turned and walked toward the door. His footsteps were slow but steady. The cadets watched him go. No one spoke. No one stood. They just sat in the silence he left behind, carrying the weight of his words like stones in their chests. At the door, Borath stopped. He did not turn around. He stood there for a moment, his hand on the frame, his head slightly bowed. "Her name was Lim Sora," he said quietly. "Remember it." And then he walked out, and the door closed behind him, and the cadets were alone with the silence and the story, and the names of 4 humans they would never forget.